Good morning. I call this meeting to order at 9:35 a.m. How is everybody? So I am opening the meeting today because it is October, which means it is our election meeting. So we will immediately go to our elections. We do not have any public comment scheduled for today. So with that, I am going to go ahead and open this up. Let's start with nominations for the vice chair position. Chair position. Are there any nominations? Yes.
I nominate Darren Hornbeck.
Are there any other nominations for chair? Okay. Do you accept the nomination?
I do. Thank you very much.
All right, let's go ahead and take a vote. I'm not going to send out the Google form for this, given there's only one nomination. So with a show of hands, everyone who affirms Darren's nomination. All right, and anybody against the nomination? Any abstentions? All right, congratulations, Mr. Hornbeck.
Thank you all. I'll do my best.
All right, now we'll take nominations for vice chair.
I'd like to nominate Sandra Scodalis.
All right, any other nominations for vice chair?
I'd like to nominate Dr. Ebony Terrell Shockley.
Great. And is Ms. Shockley with us today virtually, by chance?
She is walking in.
Oh, okay, excellent.
At the door at this moment.
Gotcha. Okay, so since we have two, I'm going to go ahead. I have a form prepared. Give me a few moments. I'm going to get this out via email to everyone on the board. And then as you submit them, I will get a spreadsheet that is generated from your responses, and we will go from there.
While Kelly's working on that, are there any other nominations for vice chair? Just to confirm. Hearing no response. So it will be Ms. Scordalis and Dr. Shockley.
Sandy, do you accept the nomination?
I do. Thank you.
Can I have a point of information? Is it customary if there's more than one person to have them actually say something or speak to their? No? Okay.
You certainly can if you'd like. I mean, there is that opportunity if you'd like to have speeches. I mean, there's nothing there's nothing that would prohibit that. So it's really kind of at the pleasure of the board if they'd like to hear a base or a speech on the basis for nominations.
Dr. Terrell Shockley, you've been nominated as vice chair for the Professional Standards and Teacher Education Board. Do you accept that nomination?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And to circle back, so if the board wants to entertain debate on the motion, essentially we would, or entertain debate on the election of vice chair, we would need a motion and a second for opening of debate on the issue. And then at that point, both Ms. Scordalis, Dr. Shockley, and really anyone else who wanted to discuss may do so. And when all debate has kind of ended, at that point we would need a motion to move to the voting.
It was really only a point of information for me. As a new person.
Sean, would I open up the floor for a motion, or is that something that you and Kelly would do at this point?
At this point, you're the chair, so you can certainly. You did, but once you have a chair, I mean, he can assume the functions of the chair. So
Just making sure. That's why I'm asking legal.
sorry, not to deprive you, Kelly, but Darren, you could feel free to entertain the motion, and if anyone wishes, we can talk about it.
All right. I would at this point entertain a motion if anyone would like to hear any comments from the candidates.
I'll move that we hear from the candidates.
I second.
All right. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Well, then I would open up to, I would say the person who's been on the board the longest. That would be Sandra. Could you start?
Good morning. So just for those of you who don't know me and who haven't been on the board very long, I think it's my 7th year on the board. I'm a 36-year teacher. I have been through the national board process, so I'm in my 3rd round of being national board certified. As my work on this board goes, I've been here through all the iterations of COMAR, the back and forth when the blueprint was passed, and then looking at what we need to match up with COMAR with the blueprint, and working through all of that and some other specific things about the when we talked about what should be included as far as suspension of certification, and so I've been doing that for the last 7 years, and been very present. I don't think I've missed maybe one meeting in 7 years.
All right, we appreciate that. Dr. Shockley, could you give a few, and of course this is all impromptu, so there was nothing to be written, so this is really on the spot, so we'll recognize that and your willingness to do that for us.
Of course. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ebony Terrell Shockley. I'm currently the Associate Dean for Educator Preparation and Undergraduate Studies at the University of Maryland, College Park. I was recruited to Maryland and very proud to be a Marylander. And I started out as a middle school science ESOL teacher, and I followed my students to high school. We remained there together until their senior year. We all graduated. And in their senior year, we all left. And many also went to the University of Maryland. During that time, I was fortunate enough to be able to serve as the technology chair for for professional development for the Maryland Society for Educators of Technology. Used to be called MICA. And in so doing, I was able to provide professional development in technology around the state and earn degrees from the western part of the state that I was not as familiar with. And then marry someone from the eastern part of the state, which I was also not as familiar with, and also earned a degree at Goucher to help me understand just the landscape of the state. As far as this board, this is my second year on the board, and I kind of worked adjacent, if you will. I helped the former representative to the Maryland Colleges of Teacher Education, representative with the culturally responsive teaching content, as well as been very active with engagement for higher education. So I tell people all the time, I didn't really leave PK-12. I just support the teachers in a different way. I enjoy the work of the board, and I look forward to merging and continuing the collaboration between PK-12 and higher education. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. I appreciate it. All right, and Kelly, you've sent out the email, correct? Yes, sir. Is there a link in the email?
There is a link in the email, unless I forgot to paste it.
I'm not sure I see it
Did
on
I forget
mine.
to paste it? That would help.
That makes me feel so much better because I do that all the time.
Here it comes.
It's not just me. All right, so we'll be looking for the second email then. So we'll give it a little bit of time for everybody's email to process through. All right, and I'm looking at mine. I think I just got it. All right.
All right, hold on. Let me check a box.
All right, and while you're doing that, I'm assuming there is a box marked email. You'd like us to check yes that you want it recorded with our email
Please,
so
yes.
that we can have a roll call. All right, and then you'll see the two choices for vice chair. So you'll want to select the one that you're voting for, and then you'll hit submit.
No, no.
I think it's
Thank you. I think I'm in.
Hey, Kelly, this is Joy. The Google, it went to a different Google
Here we go.
account, and I've tried to switch it, and it's not allowing me to.
Same. I can't.
Try
There's
it.
no.
It went to the non-public. It went to a PG County teachers another Google account that I use to access their curriculum guides, and I'm not allowed to. I can't switch my account.
Yeah, mine says the same. It says you need permission. This form can only be viewed by the
Same.
user in the organization.
Go ahead and refresh, please. I just changed a setting. It was only
Thank you.
letting state of Maryland users
Okay,
respond.
it's good.
Let
Now,
me know
Kelly,
if
if
anyone
we-
else is having issues.
If we were able to submit on the first try,
Then
we
don't
need
again.
to do it again.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
So if yours went through the first try, you don't need to do it again.
And I'll be able to tell if there's any duplicates.
Thank you.
I probably shouldn't say this, but it's a little like giving the Maryland assessments when you've got 3 kids with their hands up and mine didn't go through, and do I refresh, and which button do I press, and oh my gosh. And so if you're watching out there, we understand.
Has anyone not voted that is present?
All right. Well, Kelly, I had a question as well. Is voting only allowed for people who are logged in or at the meeting?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So if someone was watching but has not logged in, even though they're a board member, they may not vote. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Just want to make sure we're following policy.
Has everyone online voted? Great.
All right. The chair acknowledges Kelly.
Yeah, no,
That
it's
is-
fine. It's fine. So it is a tie, which means we have to vote again. So we will continue to vote until we have arrived at a majority. So I haven't limited the form's responses, so you should be able to vote again. Let me know if you have any issues. So go ahead, everybody, and please refresh your form and vote again, please. I'm still waiting for several votes to come in. here at the table, who hasn't voted yet? I don't know why I'm not receiving them all. I'm only getting, I've only gotten 5 that have come through. Can you make sure that it's submitted? I mean, I have five that came in. Try closing out that tab and then opening the link again fresh. That's what you did before? Maybe mine was one of the 5 because I did that. I don't have yours. I have Christine's, I have Melissa's, Nikki's, Keisha's. No. Mm-mm.
You didn't get mine, Kelly?
No. I might, let me just replicate the form real quick and let me send it out again. So those of you who I did get, just vote again. Give me like 30 seconds. Here it comes.
I didn't get an email, did you? Okay.
It just came through. Okay.
Okay. Yep, did that. Sandra and I were just laughing. It's like waiting for Pennsylvania to come in. You know, on Tuesday night, you're waiting for North Carolina and Pennsylvania. And which network will call it first? Right. CNN's projecting it's too close to call.
Okay, this time we do have a winner by majority vote. Ms. Ebony Terrell-Shockley is the vice chair of the Professional Standards Board.
Congratulations. All right. All right, so we'll change the seating chart a bit now. All right, and while they do that, I just want to say congratulations to both. What an honor to be nominated as well. So thank you for your willingness to serve, especially to Sandra as well. Thank you so much. All right, so I believe our next item on the agenda, we'll have to we'll check to see if they're here, is preparing equitable leaders for the equity-centered pipeline, reflections and recommendations. Kelly, do you know if those folks are ready for presentation yet? We're a little ahead on the schedule. They're actually scheduled for 10 minutes from now.
You know, some of them are virtual, so if we could maybe just give them a few minutes, I don't want to start too early.
Okay, all right, so I would propose we take about a 10-minute break, come back at 10:15, and we should be ready to go. All right, so we'll take a break. And we're on. I feel like it's the Tonight Show when the little applause sign comes on. We laughed about that last time. Before we get to our presentation, I would like to take just a couple of minutes to recognize somebody who's new to the board. This is their first meeting, and that would be, it's Joshua, right? Yes. Okay, so this is Joshua Woodward. Could you introduce yourself a little bit?
Hi, everyone. My name is Josh Davidson. I'm a 6th grade science teacher at Westminster East in Carroll County, Maryland, and it's an honor to be on the board.
All right, and I'm sorry, I said Woodward, it was Davidson. Thank you. And welcome to the board. We're so glad to have you. Nice round of applause. There's no warming up period. You just jump right in, I think, but you already got that baptism of fire, I think, from the thing. All right, so next on our agenda, if you're looking, it'll be preparing equitable leaders from Equity-Centered Pipeline, Reflections and Recommendations. And we thank you all for being here and your familiar face. But feel free to introduce yourself again and anybody else you have presenting. And we're eager to see the presentation.
Great, thank you. Thank you, everyone. My name is Alex Canberra. I work with Kelly in the Division of Educator Effectiveness. I am Director of Program Approval, Educator Preparation Program Approval. And today I am sort of speaking on behalf of one of my colleagues, Dr. Juanita Ashby-Bay, who did this presentation with another group recently. And I'm going to introduce the work for her because she's being a grandma today for a new baby. So I'm going to introduce some colleagues. I actually did work in this group until this wonderful team was hired. So I do have a little bit of history with this group, and I'm happy to be able to introduce them. I'm going to take some liberties because I'm going to introduce the Wallace organization because I believe Andy Cole probably didn't make it on today, or we may have missed him with the link. So I'm going to take some liberties and hope that my colleagues will jump in and correct me if I make any errors or if I don't do justice to this grant. So just starting with that, the Wallace Foundation, this is a foundation that's based in a New York City philanthropic organization. Their mission is to foster equity and improvements in learning and enrichment for young people and in arts for everyone. This foundation seeks to improve the effectiveness of principals who are they believe are the key to raising the quality of urban schools. And this work has been focused on developing an equity-centered principal pipeline. So this group partnered, and I'm going to improvise a little bit, but this group partnered, this Wallace Grant partnership has been between the Maryland State Department of Education, Baltimore City Public Schools, Towson University, and Morgan State University. And this equity-centered pipeline initiative, I think, is in its third year? Year four. We're in year 4 now. So this work has been going on. These folks have traveled around the country to look at other school systems that have partnered with their local institutes of higher ed to develop their leadership pipeline with a lens on really developing and retaining equity-centered leaders. So that's what Andy Cole, who's the consultant who works with this grant for us here in Baltimore and in Maryland, probably would have said, and I'm sure he would have done more justice to his organization. But what I would like to do is turn it over to the folks who have been entrenched in the work here from our partners in institutes of higher ed here. So first I'm going to introduce Dr. Tracy Roan, Assistant Dean. I'll make sure I get it right. Tracy is the Assistant Dean for Research and Community Partnerships and an Associate Professor for the Department of Advanced Studies, Leadership and Policy at Morgan State in the School of Education and Urban Studies. I think she's going to turn it over once she presents, or maybe we'll do it in tandem with Dr. Daryl Williams, Professor of Practice, Program Director of Admin 1 Certificate, Masters of Science in Admin and Supervision, and the Assistant Director for the National Center for the Elimination of Educational Disparities. NCEED, I think, is the acronym for that one. And after that, we'll be joined by Dr. Carla Finkelstein, who I think is online with us now, who works for Towson. And Dr. Finkelstein is the Associate Professor and Department Chair for Instructional Leadership and Professional Development. And they will share, through their lens, the work of their organizations and how they're building on this initiative. So thank you.
Alex, I just wanted to flag for you. I don't know if you can see, but I can see on my screen that Andy Cole has now joined us.
Well, I hope he's not judging my introduction of Wallace. I'm going to turn it over to Andy before I ask Drs. Ronan and Williams to start. So, okay, we're going to turn it over to Andy, and I hope that you didn't hear me make any mistakes. So, Andy, it's all you.
No, it's probably fine. Wallace is, and I don't want to repeat probably what she said, which was probably a lot better than what I'm going to say. But the Wallace is a national foundation located in um, New York City. It was an outgrowth from Reader's Digest, and has been focused on leadership, education leadership for the last 20 years. And part of that focus has been investing in programs which enhance the entire focus on leadership. And this particular focus is on equity-centered pipelines. And there are 7 districts that are involved in this work: Portland, San Antonio, Jefferson County, Winston-Salem, Fresno, DC, and Baltimore. And each one of those districts has what we call a district partnership team, which is made up of 2 universities, the state, and different parts of each one of those districts. So the focus on this work has been, how can districts really develop an equity-centered pipeline that focuses on developing equity-centered leaders? So if you heard something different and better, please don't tell me. Don't discourage my week as we move forward. But the whole point of this is really having, and we're talking today about universities, but having them focus on redesigning their work to produce equity-centered leaders, and to actually develop that work to change, not to change their focus, because I think each of the universities already had that focus, but to actually underscore the how parts of that work. So both Carla and Tracy are going to do a much better job of talking about how that works, and hopefully talk about a little bit about the partnership. I'm sorry I was late. I actually had to, I'm double timing. I had a meeting that started at 10, so I bounced in, finished that, and bounced into this, and I'm going to bounce out if you don't mind. So I don't know who's up next. Carla, is it Tracy or? Oh, I see.
Okay, does this work now? Yes. All right, there we are. Thank you. So thank you, Andy, for joining us. Thank you for inviting us here today, and I'm going to hand things off to my colleague, Dr. Williams, to start.
Good morning, everyone. First, let me say thank you for your work that you are doing. I have been following your work for several years. Darrell Williams, Program Director and Professor of Practice at Morgan State University. The president requires us to say the national treasure for any Morgan alum in the audience or watching, so I want to make sure I put that out there. I am indeed pleased to be a part of this project. I joined year 3. This is year 4 of our project. And Dr. Rohn has been the liaison with the group. And so what we want to do is just provide kind of an overview of where we are. And I know our partner, Towson University, Dr. Finkelstein is here. So thank you, Carla, for being present. Thank you, Andy, for always coming in. Andy's the type of person, sometimes we don't see him, but he comes in at the right time and then he leaves, and we appreciate that support.
That's why I gave Dr. Williams the clicker. He said you may need to click it. There. Okay, thank you.
So this slide just provides our potential principal pathway. And I'm going to work a little backwards. What we realize at Morgan, because we have a doctoral program, we wanted to align our master's program with the doctoral program. This program sits in the Department of Teacher Education, and development because it's a certification program, just like our teacher certification program. But what we realized, there's a nice segue from the Admin 1 certificate or the Master's in Education Administration to our doctoral program. So I've been in communication with the program director in that program, looking at the alignment, and currently we have students who are may have started their doctoral program, but they can also earn their Administrative 1, Admin 1 certificate as an elective. So we're proud about that. The other, just show our pathway beginning at the elementary education program, physical education, all the way up to our doctoral program. And what we're going to highlight is kind of like in that center, the Master's and the Admin 1. So the potential goals that we established initially was to really look at the leadership pathway with our partner school, Baltimore City Public Schools, an urban environment. However, through the redesign, we have found that these programs and the coursework would be appropriate for any school system. If you're watching what's happening in Maryland, you're seeing that our schools are changing, the demographics are changing. We want to celebrate that. And so we're pleased to have a memorandum of understanding with Baltimore City Public Schools as we develop our first cohort with this redesign. In addition, we have created additional memorandum of understanding with nearby school districts, and they're benefiting the redesign as well. I mentioned the redesign of our Master's and our Admin 1. And so as we're in year 4 of the 5-year grant, year 6 is our sustainability. So whatever we're doing this year, knowing that the funds of Wallace are slowly disappearing or will be sunsetting, we have to think about sustainability. And that's the partnership with Morgan. That's the partnership with Baltimore City Schools or any other school system where we're looking at what are we going to continue that might be cost neutral or may require some additional funds from both the university and school systems.
Okay, thank you. So the context of our work obviously is Baltimore, and we are the state's designated public urban research university. And in that capacity, we really want our students to take a place-based approach to the work, even as school leaders. One of the things that we heard from students and families when we started to do some community engagement work is that a perception that leaders understood the school, but they didn't know anything or not enough about the surrounding community. So we know that these maps here, the purple icons with the mortarboards represent every school in Baltimore City. On the right, what we see is the legacy of redlining, which even though those maps are nearly 100 years old, we see the legacy in terms of housing and economics, employment, transportation, food access, every indicator there is. And the deepest, where you see red on the map, are the most concentrated areas of economic hardship in the city. And the larger the circle, represents the greater the number of students who are served in that area. So we really wanted to make sure that leaders who come through our program are really aware of the supports and resources that are needed so that every child has a better chance at being successful in schools. And even though this focus is urban, one of the really wonderful things about Maryland is that we have such diversity in terms of rural, urban, and suburban, and issues that we see in urban spaces are not strictly only in urban spaces. Okay, next one, please. Okay, so our process. So all universities within this Wallace grant were required to complete the Education Development Center's, what's called the Quality Measures Principal Preparation Self-Study. And even though there is some alignment with CAPE and with the P-cells, it really invites a deeper dive into the program across 6 dimensions, beginning with admissions, all the way through coursework, clinical practice, and then monitoring graduate performance outcomes and ways in which universities would need to work in partnership with local districts. And so we really, it was a really eye-opening experience. I think across the network of universities, there's the perception that people in universities often think that they've got it right. And something like the QM is very sobering because you see really where there are opportunities for growth. We also created, so Dr. Gretchen Rudham, who is a professor in our program in urban education leadership, founded the advisory board think tank. And what that is a group of our alums, our current students, community members, and we came together over a 2-year period in these very intensive retreats, all-day retreats that were guided through a liberatory design practice, where we really wanted to co-develop the work, to co-design the work, to understand what leaders felt they might have needed in addition to kind of the formal book knowledge, kind of the things that on the ground may have been missing, or that weren't, where the experience, things that may be more difficult to experience in a formal classroom setting. We also partnered with Micah's Masters in Social Design program and did a lot of local work with families, with school leaders to understand leadership journeys and to get some insight beyond the tap on the shoulder and the invitation to leadership, and what does that pathway look like for leaders as we think about redesigning the broader pathway in Baltimore City, but also in terms of our own program, and what are the opportunities if someone's a teacher and maybe they find they want to do something else, how might we engage them in the possibility of leadership and make that awareness open for them? What I don't think that Andy said during his brief presentation is that Wallace has worked in principal work for decades now. The first iteration focused on exemplary principles. The second iteration was the UPPI, University Principal Preparation Initiative. So it was one university with multiple school districts. So Virginia State was one of the UPPI sites, and each university in the ECPI, which is this current generation, is assigned a UPPI mentor. So Virginia State is our mentor institution. And then we've also, over the last year, with the hiring of Dr. Williams and Dr. Richard Rhodes, formed a partnership with the organization Men of Color in Educational Leadership.
Based on the feedback and based on the quality measures, I came in and felt with the recommendations from our think tank, how do we brand, how do we market our program? And so each semester we have a speaker series where we highlight folks who are in the field to give back and speak about their work. The first time we held our speaker series was this past spring, and just coincidentally, all 6 speakers were Morgan alum. As you start to look at who's out in Maryland and doing great things. Now, these 6 are in 6 different school systems. We just held our fall speaker series. We invited a national speaker, Ken Williams, to talk about his book, Ruthless Equity. We do alumni spotlight, just to say where are our alumni now and how are they doing and what they are doing. And actually, this one, who was a consulting teacher in Baltimore County Public Schools, was just appointed assistant principal this year. So that's the kind of data that we need at the higher education level in terms of accreditation. As Dr. Rohn talked about the advisory board, here's a picture of us working on a Saturday looking at one of our syllabi and or assessments and giving the feedback. And then the last graphic is just a sample of the memorandum of understanding that we have with Baltimore City Public Schools. In terms of the recommendations, and as a former administrator in K-12 settings, the quality measures that Dr. Rohn spoke about is that self-assessment that you're looking at. How are we doing? How do you know you're doing well? What's the data points you're going to monitor? That's what we did in school systems. The outreach, what I've embraced, or what the university has embraced, my approach is you can have an open house, but you got to go to the people. And so going out in the fields, wherever I go, I didn't bring my recruitment table today, so I apologize, but I usually have some information because folks want to know about our programs or professional development. Another area that we felt was important, we have great researchers at the universities. Sometimes we need practitioners. I'm a practitioner because folks need to know, well, what is it like in the classrooms now? And as you know, since COVID and how we had to pivot with all of that, it's good to have adjunct faculties. Now, we have to be careful about the number of adjunct. Morgan is striving for his R1 status, so we all have to have our doctors. But it is important, and thanks to Assistant Dean Rohn and our Dean Prime, for allowing us to hire adjunct faculties to provide that kind of support about what's really happening in classrooms. We have redesigned many of our activities in our courses, and I'm just highlighting a few. This equity action research, where our students are in their school, working with their principal or assistant principal, developing a project that will better that school in terms of using data analysis, coming up with a plan, and following that plan throughout to see what kind of results are you getting. Simulations, as you well know, is great to have the theory and foundation, but if you're in a situation, you have to know how to respond. So thanks to the partnership, we incorporated simulations. How do you deal with a difficult parent? How do you give that feedback to a classroom teacher? How do you build community partnerships? So there's a variety of simulations that happen throughout specific courses, learning walks where folks are actually observing classroom instruction outside of their classroom. That's important, not just within their room, but outside a different grade level or possibly a different school or school system. We talked about the curriculum redesign, the community-based participatory asset, looking at grants and resources within a school community, and that mapping. I mentioned the guest speakers. We invite guest speakers not only to our speaker series, but also to our courses. And then ultimately looking at, although the Admin 1 certificate is about coursework, we're looking at, as students are going through the coursework, when is the right time for them to take that second part, which is the SLLA assessment to get their Admin 2 certification to become principals. We have certain beliefs. You have to have the background, the theory, but you also have to have the experience in order to now take on a role of a principalship. So these are our recommendations at Morgan. And we have also learned from Towson University and other schools connected with Wallace. One school that we collaborate with is San Diego State University, as we looked at our clinical experience and revised what our students do within their 280-hour clinical experience. I think that's it for Morgan.
Thank you. So I don't know if we take questions now or move on to Dr. Finkelstein and come back.
Do you have a preference?
All right, let's open it up for some questions before we go on at this point, so it's more centered to what you've just presented. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
Yes.
Sure, Dr. Tockley.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for this great work. Really appreciate it. I have a couple of quick questions before my great friend Carla comes before us. Can you tell us a little bit about how physical education was selected as a part of that pathway? Okay.
So physical education is one of the programs in the department. So our map for exposure is every program that's existing in the department in the School of Education and Urban Studies at the undergraduate level and the graduate level that's related to instruction or leadership.
Okay, thank you. And then my other question is the equity-centered co-design action research. So good. I wondered if you had thoughts about the participants extending that into perhaps their dissertation, because I see that they are on their way to write graduate work and EDD. Adele, I see you smile. That must be a yes.
It is.
Okay.
It is. That was the partnership as my first year attending the research that the doctoral students present. They have an annual symposium. And during that time, I was like, ooh, there's the connector that if our master students are starting some kind of activity and then can link it or continue that through the doctoral program. So absolutely. So we're pleased about it. It's like a mini dissertation.
Yes.
And it's about 6 or 7 months of work. But yes, students could continue if they so choose to into the doctoral program.
Sorry, and there's another piece to that. So the think tank has become what we're calling the Urban Educators Collective, and so what we're hoping is as schools come to us with issues that they're trying to solve, that we can use a co-design liberatory practice. So moving from praxis to practice in theory, and our students will be leading that work. So,
could I interject for a second?
Please.
On top of that, could you give us maybe an example of what that would look like? A school would come to you with an issue, how the program would help address that.
So, for example, we used a participatory mapping process in something called a wish box. So we wanted to understand. Members of the perception from the community school coordinator is that there were some resources that families wanted that were not in either the school's neighborhood or the residential neighborhood where the families lived. And so we took a physical map and we started with where do you go? Show us where you go for various things that you need.
And an example of that would
be
like
food or tutoring or healthcare or other support, because there's a difference between a standard government geocoded map and where people feel comfortable going, where they feel seen and valued and heard, and that's the part we were trying to tease out. So they plot things on the map, both in terms of the school's map and the residential map. And then we generate a list of those things, but also what are the other things that they would like, that they feel that they need access to, that they do not perceive themselves as having access to. And then what we try to do is essentially play matchmaker between the assets that are in that local space. So it's really in some ways extending the work that community school coordinators are doing, but with a more kind of place-based local knowledge versus what you would get if you just looked at an official map. The other part of that is a wish box where families are asked, what do you wish your school family or your school community had that you think would support your child's academic success? What do you wish your school community had to support you as a family? What do you wish your residential community have? And so these are design tools where we're really getting a more creative kind of insight into just needs and perceptions. And what we're hoping to do over the remainder of year 4 is to develop a toolkit which leaders will be able to use all over the country. That's what we're in the process of doing right now.
That sounds fantastic. I remember I served for several years on the advisory board for the Lab for Student Success at Temple. university. There used to be a number of regional labs, and we would look at all of the different studies that were done, and that was always one of the questions, like, how does the theory, what's it look like on the street?
Yeah.
How is this translating into community change? And I only put that in the context of the compliment I'm giving you because that's a wonderful answer. And I really do appreciate it. And again, I joined Dr. Shockley in saying thank you so much for this wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I could go on, but I want to open it up more. And Dr. Shockley had another question as well.
I'm going to wait for Carla and then loop it in. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Carla Finkelstein from Towson University. I'm very sorry I couldn't be with you in person today. Unfortunately, I have some other commitments that needed to keep me away from you in person, but I'm delighted to be here. I'm always delighted to see my dear friend Ebony. And I'm glad to have time with your board today. I'm going to try not to be redundant with some pieces of the presentation from my colleagues at Morgan. There are some similarities in the ways that we've been approaching this work, and then some areas that are context specific to our organization. So I'm happy to take you through today our team's journey thus far through this work in partnership with Baltimore City Schools and the Wallace Foundation around supporting the development of our Admin 1 graduate programs and our work as a department to more intentionally support the work of equity-centered and culturally responsive school leadership. I put here on this first slide just the titles of our two primary programs that we have been working on through this initiative. As many of you may know, Towson has historically been the largest preparer of teachers in the state of Maryland and is one of the largest preparers of leaders as well. So this opportunity to partner with MSDE and Morgan State and city schools around improving our equity-centered commitments was extremely welcome to myself and my colleagues as the work that we're doing on this initiative is also scaling out into the work that we do with our cohorts across the state as well. Next slide, please. Similar to what Dr. Rohn presented a few minutes ago, we began the process of working with Wallace on this initiative by diving pretty deeply into a self-assessment of our programs through this quality measures process. And through that process, there were a number of goals that our team was able to name and address. I will say that this process pushed us to think really deeply and to be a little bit vulnerable in where we honestly are as a program and where we want to do better for our students and their work with the young people in the city and across the state. So here are 5 areas that we identified that we wanted and needed to work on. One is to develop a shared definition of equity-centered leadership and to articulate a set of core beliefs and commitments across our department. I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. We recognized that we then wanted to revise our courses and our assessments to make sure that they were intentionally aligned with these beliefs and provided a better through line for our students so that they were not taking a series of 6 courses or 12 courses in the master's program, but actually having a trajectory of experiences and development. Along those lines, we also realized a need to provide coherence and consistency across multiple instructors and sections of our courses, not only for our Baltimore City program, but across the 12 to 15 cohorts we tend to run each year. Connected to that, we wanted, and we're actually looking forward to using this initiative as an opportunity to improve the clinical opportunities that our students have throughout our program to practice equity-centered, culturally responsive leadership, and to do so with feedback from our faculty as well as school-based leaders. That clinical opportunity has always been a challenge. I think many of you know this, as our students are full-time educators in schools. It is challenging to ensure that they have consistency of experiences when we don't have the latitude to give them extended time out of their current roles. So we have been excited to think creatively about that. And finally, an area for growth with us has been to improve our connection with our graduates to help support their ongoing support with us and for each other, and to help build communities of equity-centered leaders. We do have our students always going through our program as cohorts. What we haven't done as well is help support their communication and their professional community with each other once they leave us. So for the next slides, I'm going to give at least one example for each of these 5 bullets briefly. Next slide, please. So one of the first things that our department chose to do with this Wallace work is we spent a number of months, a full semester and a summer, reading, writing, talking, and then reiterating, reading, writing, talking, in order to really dig deeply into our own beliefs about equity-centered and culturally responsive leadership, and to figure out where we were on the same page and how we could articulate these commitments in a coherent whole as a guiding document and through line for our department. So what you see in front of you is a document. We consider it a living document that we worked for several months to compose. And it now provides our guiding anchor for pretty much everything that we do in terms of looking at our courses, looking at our assessments. We introduce potential new students to this from the time that they even come to us for an information session, so that they are well aware of where we're coming from and what we're about in terms of promoting effective leadership. The next slide will give you one example of that. So if we could go to the next slide. We did implement some revisions across all 6 of our core Admin 1 courses. I will give one example here. Our first course in the program is called Leadership of the Schools. And there are 2 things that we center that we have found have been extremely important to our students' learning and their often reframing of the way that they think about school leadership. One has to do with really deeply understanding their own identity as humans, as well as educators and as leaders. And we do that through, in part, an extended activity that we draw from Christine Sleater's work of a critical family history that we engage our students in. It's something like a racial autobiography, but engages our students not only in looking at their own timeline, but looking at that of past generations and ancestors, not only through information they can gather themselves, but through a look at the socio-political and economic context of where their previous generations were living and experiencing life, to help them understand, how have you gotten to where you are? And now that you know this, what must your work be? We also have found that, unfortunately, so much of the deficit narrative that is pervasive, not only in our school systems, but in our country at large, that deficit framing is very tenacious. And so our efforts to reframe for folks what it means, not only to take an asset-based perspective towards young people, families, and communities, but also then to know what to do with that asset-based framing. Once we're building more equal relationships, more reciprocal relationships with students and families. How are we making use of that information and those relationships to really reframe the work of the school to center what is important for families and communities? And we do that through an activity of taking our students through a series of asset-oriented listening sessions where they have conversations with young people, with staff members at the school whom they didn't know well before, with a family, and with at least one community elder in the community where their school sits. And I give a quote here from one student's analysis paper. We asked students then to write up their listening sessions and analyze them in terms of this asset orientation and how knowing these folks well can help them rethink about where their school can move. And here was one of our students who interviewed a person who was a part-time hall monitor in the school, learned that this person is actually a parent of folks in the school and also a community member. And she was doing an awful lot more than traffic monitoring in the hallway at the school. So this was an important experience for this student and has been a great example for us of how this asset orientation can work in uncovering the sometimes invisible work that people are already doing to support teaching and learning and growth of young people in our schools. Next slide, please. With regard to the coherence and consistency that we were seeking to develop across course sections and across instructors, we have instituted a co-planning and co-teaching model for as many of our courses that I can figure out how to afford to do so. And that co-teaching model has been really instrumental for us in digging more deeply into our pedagogy. As many of you know, as educators, that's always one of the best ways to improve our teaching is to work with a colleague and articulate our decision making at every step of the way. So that's been extremely consequential for us. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we were also looking at revising and deepening the clinical experiences that our students have. One of the ways that we're doing this is by working with our graduates from the program as well as from our district partners in Baltimore City to more intentionally build a cadre of current leaders who are demonstrating some of the components of the equity-centered leadership that we have defined together. We're doing that through offering some shadow days for our students to visit other schools, and also for, as part of the equity-centered challenge projects that we have our students do, which I can explain more in a moment. We also are piloting what we're calling learning walk triads, where we are having students in groups of 3 along with one of our faculty dig into their equity-centered challenge projects, which are kind of action inquiry projects. They are bringing folks to their school, these other 2 of their classmates and their faculty, to dig in and do a learning walk together around the problem of practice that they have identified and seeking that kind of critical friends feedback on how they're doing that work. Next slide. Also mentioned that keeping track of our alumni and helping to support their continued support for each other and collaboration is something that is important to us. One area of the grant is that it is providing for the district to build a database that is going to help them keep track of folks who are in various stages of the pipeline. And we're excited to be able to share some of those data to see where our students are ending up and how to follow them longitudinally. We've also started implementing an alumni reunion where we bring folks back and do a lot of celebration of the work that they're doing. And finally, we have started a biannual event. We call it an Indaba, which is a Swahili word for community problem-solving dialogue. We bring folks together twice a year. This is a community-facing event with our partner, the Central Pratt Library. And twice a year, we hold these Endabas where we invite teachers, leaders, community leaders, young people, and we come together around particular topics of interest, for example, equity-oriented family and community engagement. And we do some work together to kind of center the local expertise in our area and have some informed dialogue that way. Next slide, please. So far, as we are starting our 4th year in the grant, we have some initial learnings or recommendations that we can kind of tentatively share with all of you about what we're learning so far, about what it takes to really help support the development of equity-centered leadership practices for our students. And I mentioned these before. The first one is that it takes a tremendous amount of attention and practice and recursive visitation to disrupt some of these tenacious deficit-based perspectives. We also have learned that it is extremely consequential for us to help our students develop habits of mind so that they can check everyday decisions they are now making and will be making as leaders against their core beliefs for equity. We like to say that we try to help folks move past kind of this sense of false urgency and whack-a-mole that often unfortunately happens in our schools, and to be able to have habits of mind where they can check their decision making against their beliefs for equity. And then the last one is, again, this idea of disrupting institutional status quo practices and approaches obviously is not easy work. And so we are looking for as many opportunities as possible to model and practice those skills. And that is what I have for you today. The last slide, if you could just switch to that, I wanted to just acknowledge my colleagues at Towson in the ILPD department who are my partners in this work. So thank you for your time.
All right, please join me in a nice round of applause. Thank you so much for your work. We're going to open it up to questions in a second, but I just want to take the liberty to tell you how impressed I was with the presentation. And one of the things I loved is that first slide that you gave, where you gave the 2 historical maps side by side, one more current and one historical, and it just showed how you're putting this work into a historical perspective and a sociological perspective. And then I loved it later in the presentation when you talked about how you're guiding your students to do exactly the same thing in looking through their biographies, because that's really how all of us coming from so many different backgrounds learn to connect the commonalities we have in the diverse classrooms that we teach and see the differences in kids. So what a great process that you all have come up with. I just think it's wonderful. So again, thank you so much for the presentation today. I really did appreciate it. Now, I don't want to hog the time because I'm sure people do have questions or comments. So I open up the floor. Sure, Dr. Yoho or Karen Yoho.
Just Karen. So I'm a school board member. I represent MABE on this board. In our world, K-12, equity, unfortunately, with all the work that we all do, has sometimes taken on a negative connotation. Do you all encounter that at all? Is higher ed above that? Wonderful, glad to hear, or not? So how do you deal with any negative connotations? Anybody that wants to answer that?
So we actually have found that. So I'm trained as a linguistic anthropologist. So when we kept saying this is the equity centered, I kept thinking, well, what do people really think? And so we saw when MICA went out into the community through their social design program that is it justice? Is it fairness? We, did not get the in the university since 1879. And so I think that to do this work at Morgan, the work is embraced and we see the ties to the university's mission. And I think we are in a climate where I was expecting potentially more pushback, but perhaps even though we are the northernmost southern state. I'm not seeing it, so.
I just want to add.
Sorry, go ahead.
I just want to add, it was helpful when Mabe defined what equity meant. And then school systems developed their own equity policy, and just to say, what does that mean? And what we have found that our students come from Baltimore, majority from Baltimore City, but other places. So we immediately talk about what is equity? What is the definition of your school system? And how have you watched that evolve? The part two to that is to ground everyone coming from multiple school systems. We have our equity pillars. So there's certain activities or exposures that students will have: student-centered, systems thinkers, change agent, being a reflective practitioner. So this activity happened. Let's reflect on it. Would you have done the same thing? Would you have done something differently? So I think it has been helpful at the university, but also put my previous hat on as a former administrator. When the state had equity policy or definition and school systems developed their own, most of them were similar. We just took that and expounded on it to make sure everyone had that foundation, and then when they go out into their school system, it wouldn't be foreign to them in terms of the work of equity. Hence why we changed the action research to equity action research, to look at data. What's happening in your particular school where you're not seeing success? What would you like to do differently, and try to monitor that throughout that practicum. Sorry, Carla.
No, that's okay. It's just hard for me to see everybody at once. The only thing I would add to what my Morgan colleagues have already clearly articulated is, yes, we found that when we dig into what we mean by this definition of equity with our students, when we can come to a shared understanding, and for us, sometimes it can be pretty simple to say, well, if we believe that equity in education means that student progress and achievement is no longer correlated with any demographic or personal characteristics, we get a lot of traction with that. We find that educators in our program who are interested in developing leadership are comfortable with that definition, even if some of them from some districts are initially wary of the politicization of the term of equity.
Thank you very much. What I hear you saying is you've defined the word and instead of letting it be co-opted. And I think that's very helpful. Thank you.
Dr. Balson, I think you had a comment or a question.
Sure. Actually, building a little bit on where Karen was going with this, I find defining equity as achievement. I mean, it's an essential element of achievement. But the experience, because I think we work in very similar districts, that it is a trigger for some people. And so, in terms of preparing either educators of any kind, leaders, teachers, there's sort of this reverse cultural competence that's necessary, because to prepare someone in an urban setting but then send them out to a rural or suburban setting, they need to have an understanding of how to engage in this work without sort of being misperceived or sabotaged. And I think that needs to be a deliberate skill set we equip people with, because coming into I've worked in a variety of settings where the openness of the discourse around equity is different depending on where you are, and so being deliberate about how we prepare our educators to exist in those situations, because we have a great challenge retaining people who are the exact people we need because we have populations that are underserved in our community, because we need that sort of core understanding of equity as kind of an academic thing, but the ability to maybe speak about it in terms that resonate better in our community.
I would just like to add, Dr. Rohn talked about our advisory board that morphed into this urban leaders collective. we were preparing for our second meeting with the group. But to your point, Dr. Bolson, we ended up talking about what do leaders need, the novice leaders, the first to 3 years, and versus the veteran. And what was interesting, I was just looking at my notes, they talked about navigating politically through a school system. So no matter where you come from, now you're in this environment. How do you navigate? How do you survive? Looking at the politics and procedures, mentorship and coaching are just some examples that this collective group, now these are leaders in the community and school systems, when we distilled it around first 1 to 3 years and then experience, that whole politics seemed to be resonating. You see it, you read about it, you hear it, but then folks want to know, how do you navigate? And we all can share personal stories around that, but also building that team of support, because that's important. I think you're right on, and that's why we felt we need to continue that those assets. Once folks finish, then they're not finished with us. You know, how do we continue to support them collaboratively with the school system? So I need to navigate that as well, because each school system has its own kind of structures and politics. How do you navigate your own school system by building that cadre? So that's one of the things that the Urban Leaders Collective will be looking at, because it's a need out there, a desperate need out there.
Please go.
And if I could add, because our programs run throughout the state, and Dr. Bolson, we've been privileged to run a number of leadership cohorts for Harford County as well. One of the things that comes up, regardless of the context in which our students work, is a pretty high anxiety level about taking on decision making that might be perceived as politically controversial. Either politically, you know, in the larger sense of our national dialogue, or within just the local LEA. And what I think could be fascinating and really consequential, as we are working on this Wallace grant and being able to take a deep dive and collect data about the students we're working with through that grant, I would love to, if there is interest from PSTEB or MSDE or any of the other LEAs, to look at the ways in our leadership programs that we are helping our developing leaders begin to develop and practice this skill set for courageous decision making, and the degrees to which that looks similar or different across different contexts with regard to issues related to equity-centered leadership. So if that makes sense, I think that it's an open question to us. We do a lot of work with our students about kind of how to navigate the social and political landscape so that decisions they're making, I guess the language they would use is, how do they make sometimes difficult decisions that they feel are right for their school community without losing their jobs, to be honest. Like, there is that anxiety out in our world today. And I think it's an open question of, does the skill set for doing that effectively, for doing that navigation effectively, does it look different in different counties across Maryland? And I would love to participate with collaborators who are also interested in that.
Dr. Roan Williams and Finkelstein, that's a yes in terms of my interest. I'm just speaking as one person, but I'm also leading the equity team for the School Improvement Leadership Academy at the University of Maryland for Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. So we have a lot of people and data that I think could extend your work when you think about sustainability, as well as this model. And I really appreciate that co-teacher model in there as an ESOL and special educator. But I just wanted to come off mute and say yes really quickly before we let Dr. Allen answer.
Thank you all for sharing your exciting work. And I'm going to be reaching out to y'all because I often, not often, but I was excited to see how communities are being included, and not just included, but are being centered in how you're preparing school leaders. And I do that in how I think about teacher preparation. But so my question, though, is, as you think about your work, I'm wondering if you could speak to the implications of it for state standards for administrators, as we think about like what our role is on this board, because we often know that standards are what help to like codify and reflect the commitments and priorities, and so I'm wondering if you could speak to that at all.
Like a state version of PSEL, for example.
I'm happy to jump in if my colleagues from Morgan are okay with that.
Go on, and I'll add.
Okay. One thing that I've been thinking about, and I actually have the privilege of serving on another work group where we are talking about this quite often, is the ways in which the MSDE standards for leadership preparation have historically been content neutral. They don't take a stand either way about sort of this, about whether, for example, folks who come in through a credit count approach to getting their Admin 1, they take certain courses, but the content of those courses and whether or not it is embedding any particular approach towards supervision or curriculum and assessment, it simply doesn't take a stance on that one way or the other. And so I wonder if that's a place that we might think about. Like, does the state of Maryland want to take a stand on that? It's certainly in the PSEL and NELP standards as well.
And I could say on top of that, I was just noticing with Dr. Taylor, the work from this group is being used to inform the work of the administrator COMAR work group, which is making quite a bit of progress and so forth. Dr. Taylor is on that committee. I'm on that committee, as are you. So eventually, like in a larger context, when that group begins to bring back potential rewrites of COMAR for admin, we'll want to remember this presentation because that'll explain where some of those changes are probably going to be generated from. And having served on the board for years, this is one of the first times we've ever began to look at updating our COMAR on administration. So this work is long needed and extremely important. So, and Kelly, I'm sure later can give us sort of an update on that group, or can Dr. Taylor, but that gives a historical perspective on it. Any other questions, comments?
So if I could add to that, so some time ago, I did some work on chronic absenteeism in Baltimore City. And I had a list of schools. And when I entered schools, I had a list of schools with children with high rates of absenteeism and low rates. And as soon as I walked into a school, I could tell from the climate of that school whether the attendance was high or low. I could tell by whether a child was greeted by name. I could tell whether any adult could come up and engage with the child about something they love to do, whether it was reading or they were a Girl Scout or whatever, something about that child. So when we started this work, I know that there, we have CAPE and we have PSEL and we have, the QM, and I realized that we could design the ideal curriculum and leaders could be equity centered, but there's this really critical piece about dispositions and empathy and awareness. And I think that those are the most critical pieces of leadership. And, there are ways that we've, through questioning, through not helping leaders to not make assumptions, but to ask why something is happening or why a child has a certain response. So I don't really. So what I'm saying is that there are these characteristics of really strong leaders that no matter where they are, they have certain qualities that allow them to see children and teachers and everyone in that community to really see that person and to value them and to meet them where they are. And I don't know what standards get us to that point, but I think that's what we need.
Excellent conclusion. Thank you so much. All right, one more round of applause. Just thank you so much for presenting today. Very informative. All right, I realize we're a little bit over time, and that's not your fault. It was wonderful. I would propose we take about a 5-minute break, though, and then come back. All right, thanks, everyone. All right, so welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a good, productive break. Next on our agenda, we have a couple of things. You'll notice it says various Comar special education coursework provision. Kelly, if you could guide us through that, I would appreciate it.
Absolutely. Okay, so there is a handout, and for those of you online, it is the one that has 13A120104 at the very top. So during our last meeting, we discussed some potential options for specialists and administrators specifically to have a little bit more time to get that special education course that is required at initial licensure. The board asked MSDE to draft some language regarding the temporary professional license and expanding the use of that license for this purpose. So that's what we've done. We've had to address it in a couple different places. So there are several regulations that I'll walk you through. I do want to preface this by saying that this is for discussion only, and these particular regulations are already being promulgated, so we cannot take any action to publish them until that promulgation process is finished. As an update, I just looked. Those regulations are due to be in the Maryland Register on the 18th of October for 30 days, and so once they come back, they'll come back to this board, and we will request permission to adopt or amend and start the process over depending on the public comments, and then we will do the same thing for the state board. So this is all kind of, we'll need to pause until that takes place. With that said, we start with 13A120104, which is issuances and types of licenses. This is in the first chapter of general provisions. And the change that you're going to see here, I apologize, this isn't in color, so it's a little difficult to see, but all the way at the bottom for temporary professional license, there are some brackets here. So we've just removed the language saying that it is only issued for licenses under, and it points to the teacher chapters. So that's no longer going to be the case. So we've stripped that out. And then if you turn to page 2, so I'm actually going to come back to this because there are two things that, if we're going to open these regulations, there are some clarifications that we have been holding until this time. So I'll circle back to this because I don't want to confuse you. Let's just stick with the special ed piece for now. So go ahead and turn to the next page where we see our second regulation. This is licenses for specialists. And you can see where there's a highlighted section. This is new. So this, for the specialist specifically, it expands. We could already use this credential for specialists solely to issue if they failed to meet the renewal requirements for professional licensure. So this expands that and now says if an applicant has not completed 3 semester hours or obtained 3 state-approved CPD credits in special education coursework, but otherwise meets the requirements for initial licensure, a local school system, state-operated school, or non-public school approved under COMAR 13A0910 may request a temporary professional license for the applicant. So this is the language that we've drafted. You're going to see the same thing in the administrator chapter with, the word specialist replaced for administrator.
All right, any questions or comments regarding that? All right, we appreciate that. Thank you. That looks good.
Absolutely.
All right, and then the next section was incorporation by reference.
And I'm going to ask that Alex come up and do this part.
Sure. Okay, this will be COMAR 13A 070603. You'll see the handout says incorporation by reference.
And again, this will be for discussion only. And if there are no recommendations for amendments, we plan on bringing this back to you during the November meeting for permission to publish. This is not being promulgated, so we can move forward with this particular regulation.
Okay, thank you. She brings me in for the heavy hitting, All right, so the first change is going to be to H, secondary areas, which is, probably almost halfway through your incorporation by reference. And so the secondary areas under number 7, national standards for the preparation of social studies teachers, National Council for Social Studies. This change was just a date change, and I think it was our error. Many of these were our errors initially when we were first looking these up. And I'll tell you, in mine and my team's defense, we're looking them up online. Sometimes the publication date online, you know what I mean, is a different date than the date of the standard. Sometimes they get updated annually, or they got to get republished, and they look different. So it's taken a little bit of digging. So when there's just a year or so that's off, that's typically what it is. So that's what occurred in that one. The next one is the National Association of Schools of Theater, NAST. So this was an updated, just an updated publication for 2023, 2024 from the year prior. So that's what that date change is. The next big one is under specialist areas for number 2. The KCREP standards, Council for Accreditation of Counseling and Related Educational Programs. This was they were just republished. This is an updated publication. There were changes to this one, so this one's now a 2024 publication, so we've made that update. Then below that, you'll see we've added number 4, which is the American Library Association, American Association of School Librarians, and the and CAPE standards. These were added because 2 entities that oversee the libraries came together with CAPE to put together a publication for standards. So we added that to the already existing standards framework for learners, American Association of School Librarians, which we had below that. So this is a brand new reference, brand new set of standards that we've added. That went ahead and changed the numbering for the remainder of the specialist areas. And the only other change in that area was for NASP, the school psychologist, from 2010. The credentialing standards from 2010 and the 2020 standards were in development from 2016 to 2019 when we began drafting these regulations. So these have been updated to 2020 from 2010. So I think I believe we just had the older ones because we began promulgating these regulations with these references incorporated. I think that's where the error was. And we've just caught it now, so. The standards for learning American Sign Language, this was an incorrect date of 2018. In 2012 is when the standards were finalized, and that's where the standards still should be 2012. I think the 2018 was, again, what the publication online said. Maybe it was copywritten or something, and that's what we use. But when we go back and read about it and read through them, the standards were unchanged from that time. So that's a reversion back to 2012. The National Association Schools of Music Handbook, this is just an update to 23-24. The SHAPE standards, National Standards for Initial Physical Education, Society of Health and Physical Education Educators, SHAPE. This was one of those ones where the standards was 2017. When we published it, we went with the 2018 copyright that was online. The standards are actually developed and agreed upon in 2017, so we're reverting back to that. The standards for TESOL, for teaching English to speakers of other languages, should be a 2019. Again, they were copywritten, but they were referred to as the 2018 standards. This is one where, this is where it was hard for me. So I'll be honest, this was one where the publication date, it says copywritten, and this is the date on their website, and that's the date that they're using. But it sort of is the opposite of what the other ones were, as far as I could read. What I just said, we reverted back. So what I can find online is that the most recent publication, the most recent copyright for those TESOL standards are 2019. That's what I believe is accurate. I welcome any feedback if anyone, since this is for information. If anybody determines that there is a different date that we should be putting on it, please give us that feedback. And the last change was to the Model Code for Educator Ethics from NASDAQ. Again, we published ours with the 2021 version. They've been updated a few times. This is just a second edition. So there was some language change in the second edition. We had the first edition in 2021, so this is what's current now. And I think that's the extent of the changes, and they should be pretty straightforward.
Thank you for this detailed overview. Without seeing the original document, I just had a question about, for the social justice standards, I feel like there was a one-pager that mapped the standards to the critical practices, or to include the critical practices. Do you know if it includes the critical practices for?
Is that what you're saying? That's something that the Southern Poverty Law Center creates?
So within the social justice standards, the part
Okay.
2 is the critical practices. I think it's the critical practices for anti-bias teaching. Do you know if we are including that? I remember in one of the technical assistance meetings asking or bringing it up, and I thought that either we provided or MSDE provided like a one-pager mapping the similarities so that this doesn't have to be changed, but I just wanted to know if anyone.
I'll have to look into it.
Thank
I'll
you.
look at it and see, because off the top of my head, I don't remember.
Okay, and I
Yeah, we
there's
might
like
have
a
an
gazillion
answer.
on here.
That's fine. We may have an answer before the end of the meeting. I'll message Kelly if I get it.
Okay, thank you.
Everybody else good?
All right, anybody else?
Thank
All right,
you.
thank you to you and your team for this work. Did you have to use eye drops? This looks like stuff where you're at the screen all the time. This is glamorous stuff, so.
Darren, you know we've been doing this for years, right? You
I
know how many
know.
times we did it all in paper the first time. Like our conference room and boxes, it's filled. At least we can do it on a CD now.
All right. Well, we really do appreciate it. To you and your team. It's very well researched. All right. Thank you for that. It was pointed out we haven't had a point where we approve the minutes, but I think we'll move that down to where we set the agenda. All right. So the next thing, you have a beautiful color copy of the teacher workforce supply and demand diversity. So if you could find that, it's also online. We wanted to put in a section where we could have time for any reflection, questions, and so forth after the presentation. So I'm going to give you a second or two just to overlook that document again before we start. So let's take about 2 or 3 minutes just to look at it, refresh your memory, and consult your notes. All right, so as you continue to look through the document, let me just give you a little bit of a historical perspective of this. So when we were doing the massive rewrites of COMAR, there was a point after we had finished our work and we were asking the state board for their approval to jointly publish. Kelly took them through the COMAR that was written, Belita and I were there, and one of the questions that was posed is the level to which we pay attention to how the COMAR will affect teacher retention and attrition. And Melita and I had some discussions with that, and we kind of came to the conclusion that we didn't quite know what the numbers were across the state on those things. And so we suggested that we get the same report that the state board gets, only to realize that they don't really get a comprehensive report. And we'd always had the, teacher staffing reports and things like that, and the critical needs areas. I mean, those came about. So one of the things several years ago that we asked Kelly in her office to do was create a document like this, so we got a much better overview. And what a fantastic result that was. So we've had a couple of these documents through the last couple of years, and this really does produce a very clear picture of where we stand, especially if you put this in context of some of the previous reports and you see where it's going. So thanks to Kelly and her team for putting this together. I think this is easily one of the most interesting documents this board gets every year, and we always eagerly await it. So after the presentation that we had of this, we did want to have some time for questions, comments, feedback, and so forth. So at this point, I'll open it up to the floor for anybody who might have a question or comment.
Yes, good morning again. So my comment is to echo your sentiment. Like this document, I don't know if you all remember, in the spring we hosted a teacher summit at the University of Maryland, and the other version of this from last year, I don't know that we would have been able to have the kind of conversations we needed without it. So I really appreciate the work of the board. On slide 11, and this might go beyond the folks in this room, I remember asking, I think it might have been actually the research team, Kelly, about the data for some of our First Nations groups in the state, and I don't know if they said that data is meaning the numbers are so small that it's negligible. But I think as we consider and think about just the diversity that the state offers and the multilingualism that is around our state, that having some information, if it's available, I don't think it's zero. I think there were just like small numbers. I don't know if you remember that conversation, but anyway, I just think that will be not for this report, but just going forward, like knowing, so where are those teachers? How can we continue those teachers? Because the state of Maryland has a rich history of First Nations groups. And so that could be helpful for us as we think about recruitment and colleagues and letting people know that teaching is the best profession ever, all the things. So I don't know does that?
No, noted, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else? Dr. Paulson?
So, my greatest concern with regard to teacher shortages and things like that is in the area of special education. And I would argue that that might be something that we should sort of call out a little differently in something like this, only because we've obviously seen our conditional or under-certified or underprepared teachers ramping up very quickly, and Harford County, like many of the counties, is certainly right in the middle of that. And of course, the area with the greatest number of conditional teachers for us is special education, and that has. I feel like that's something that is going to need a great deal of targeted attention in the state, and I'll explain why. In Harford County, in the last 2 years, our special education population's grown by 14%. Our regular population and our non-special ed population is essentially flat. Nationally, you're seeing the costs go up. I would argue that having so many underprepared teachers in special education classrooms is a monstrous liability, the greatest liability. And so I think particular attention here, because we also understand that, of course, we deal with federal guidance on this, and that was the one area where we couldn't extend the conditional, and I completely understand the reasoning for that. So I just think doing something additional to continue to have the focus on this, because it's, the increasing rates are something I've talked about this with superintendents from all over the country in multiple groups I'm engaged with, and they're all just nodding their heads the way people in this room are right now. And that this is something that, I believe, and I'll make another kind of bold statement, which may or may not fit in the PSTEB context, but when I look at the budget challenges in Harford County, the blueprint is minor compared to the special education challenge. Special education is consuming our budgets. And so looking at this, so I'll get off that soapbox for a second. The second observation here, and it was one of the slides way toward the back. I'm on pages 19 and 20. We see the disparities that, coming in as conditional teachers, that's really where we're able to recruit the most, and so it's such an essential thing. And that observation's been made at this table before. And so one thing I sort of contend sort of from a philosophical perspective is because we are confronting this teacher shortage, because we're confronting particularly a shortage with regard to, a representative population of teachers, and we're sort of getting our best results here, that we need to elevate the conversation around how we support teachers. Because if we, got more strict and didn't allow conditional teachers, that would really harm us in the area of advancing sort of the diversity needs we have. And so it really is about support. And when you get to slides 20 and 21, and you start seeing the disparities in the high poverty, low poverty, that's where we need the experienced teachers. That's where we need. So it again comes back to the support we're able to give teachers, and so just underscoring what we can do with that. I believe. And again, this is in the blueprint discussion table. We have to look at how the certification piece comes in, but we need to, I think, first solving the special ed, second solving the retention in these high need schools, and anything we can do at this table to help advance that, because unfortunately, it's getting harder. So I'll stop there.
Sure, Kelly.
So one of the things the board could consider is focusing on that conditional license requirements piece. That is absolutely within the purview of this board. And if there are supports that this board feels should be incorporated into the issuance of that license. Right now, it's very educational based. You have the bachelor's degree, the position is available. So one of the things to consider would be really fleshing out what that support should look like at an LEA, and the minimum. So, again, the state would set the minimum threshold, and LEAs would be free to go above and beyond. But that is one thing to consider as we think about that work.
Kelly, just thinking about what Dr. Bolson's question was, and the conversation that we had last time about special education, the portal of special education courses that are now available asynchronously, I think, that the state is offering, do you know if those courses include all of the content that would be available for special education certification, or are those are more singular?
Yes.
Okay. You see what I was trying to do? I was trying to see how they could
so that resource is solely meant for the specialists and administrators that need that one
course.
Credit course.
You see where I was trying to go?
Yeah.
I'm trying to get to.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's connecting those is actually very interesting, because I realize that by talking about how important it is to support particularly our special educators, because we have so many, that I understand this other requirement. So we're addressing that we can get the specialists in, but we haven't sort of stepped away from that requirement, because it is so essential. I know, as a young administrator, I had no experience with special education. It was a long and challenging learning curve. And so I think this is just a conversation that needs to continue to be elevated. I don't know what exactly the right approach is, and I don't know how much it's a conversation at this table, but I appreciate the expertise of the office here to sort of think creatively about what can we do, and how can we help us address something that is continuing to get harder, because as we lose certified teachers in the special education realm, that actually increases the burden and makes it harder for us to retain. It's something that's building momentum, and we haven't yet. And I know incentivizing people to stay in this special education classrooms is something that we're seeking solutions to, and that's not this table's conversation either. But I feel like it's all hands on deck trying to figure this one out, because we're going the wrong direction.
I'm sorry, I want to jump in, because you said a couple of things that really resonate with me. One of them is, yes, it's getting harder. These are not new issues. These have been issues, the same reports and the same things since the time I've been on the board, and all of you are shaking your heads because you know it's the truth. If we knew how to fix this, we would have fixed it. So what we're doing is not working, and the problem is getting worse. Now, we've taken an enormous amount of time to talk about how teachers go about improving student performance in their classroom. They have to know the needs of their students, the backgrounds of their students, and begin to tailor their instruction to those students. Then they need to figure out what those students need and then come up with the solutions of how they adjust their teaching to that. And then they check to see that if it's working, and that's called an SLO. And that's partially how we say how our teacher's doing. That process, and I don't mean to step on any toes, that's not the process leadership uses. Not in a concrete way. And here's what I'm going to get back to. If we go to page 8 and we see the attrition levels, okay, in most recent year, 10.7% of Maryland teachers did not return. We're trying to fix the problem, and we haven't asked what the cause is. And here is the problem, and I've said this many times, because the current instruments that we are using to tell us why teachers are not staying has never been developed. Our exit surveys do not give us the information that we need because they're not courageous enough to ask the right questions. And until we get that information, we are trying to solve a problem that we don't know what the cause is, and it is egotistical to continue in this vein. So we have to really begin to do the same things we're asking classroom teachers to do with the diverse needs of their students. We have to do that with the workforce, because no corporation can survive with this much turnover. Just looking at it from a business perspective, going back to No Child Left Behind. We learned how to apply business techniques to education, and this is one of the appropriate ways. You can't do teacher turnover like this. And the bleeding out of teachers and the expense it takes to train a teacher, to acclimate them, only to have them leave before their third year, not 5, just third. The stress it causes on the rest of the group of teachers who help that person invest in them, only to see them walk out the classroom. We have to know why they're leaving. And so one of the things that I think is in our purview is that when we begin to look at the design of teacher education, what we require for certification, the skills and dispositions we want to see teachers have, we need to make sure those are tailored to the needs they tell us they have, and we don't have an avenue to do this. So one of the things I would like to see, and I do want to talk to Dr. Shockley much more about this, we talked about meeting together on this, is as a board, I think that the time is coming, and I throw this out for the consideration of the board. We need to ask for information. This board is being asked to do some things with COMAR, and we have a very limited, purview. But within that purview, we are not well equipped to create an answer to the problem. So my thought is we really do have to think about working with the state board and MSDE on providing an instrument that all counties can begin to use to get to the answers that we need. And that is a much better exit survey. And I'm not talking about a get you kind of survey where it's your fault or that fault. Okay? Teachers were scared when we started writing SLOs and we started to look at all of our subgroups and so forth. But we got over that because we realized we had to come together in order to move the needle. That same feeling has to now be applied when it comes to leadership. So we have to get information without being scared of what the information tells us, because that's the only way we're going to go forward. And it's not a blame approach. It has to be, as you said, and I love that comment, it's an all hands on deck. So in the future, I'd like us to consider something by which our board says we need more information to inform the decision making, and we need an instrument to do that. That's my suggestion. And I apologize for taking it so much time. Please.
Yeah, can I add some? Thank you so much for that. I love that. I would just add to that, I wonder if there's also richness in data that shows why teachers are staying, to try to replicate some of those things. The other data that I would love to see, and I'm sure we have this at an LEA level, is retention by schools within a district, because I would wager a guess that we are probably seeing some correlation between schools with strong leadership and retention of teachers. I would love to see that data to see if that's true or not. But I wonder if the retention issues we're seeing are a school by school level. We talked a lot about school leadership today and all of the efforts that are happening across the state to strengthen school leadership, but I wonder if that is an avenue as well. So additional data on retention by school. And in the same vein, interviewing stay interviews. Why are teachers staying? And this is something when and also I should have started off by saying this data is incredible and like such a great first step. So that can't be stated enough. And I wonder if then part of that plan is also figuring out how to help leaders in retaining their teachers, really concrete strategies. Last thing I'll name is there was data that was done like years ago, data that was pulled in city schools, Baltimore City Public Schools years ago, on teacher retention, where we learned our recruitment issue was a retention issue. The right hand and left hand just like were not working together. And one thing that was uncovered during that time is the very small percentage of principals that actually asked teachers to come back the next year. And if you ask principals in their building, do you value this teacher? Yes, I do. Did you ask them to come back? Did you tell them, I really value you, I would love for you to come back? Oh no, I didn't do that. I have all these other things that I'm dealing with. So just like, I think there could be some low cost ways to both uncover what that data is by school, and then some low level, low hanging fruit things we could do to help with that.
And I want to piggyback on that a little bit too, because my building principal, Dr. Mike Dillman, has his doctorate in this issue itself and has presented to the board, although a lot of you were not on the board at that time. And he referred to those as cost-neutral strategies that can have enormously high effect, but just are often not being done. So there is some, as you said, low-hanging fruit that's pretty easy, and then there's some more. But I agree. We recently did, as our school improvement committee, did surveys, and we divided up by years of experience to say, why are you considering leaving? If so, what are the driving forces to that, and what would cause you to want to stay, and why are you staying? And you're right, when you get both sides of those, you really do get a fresh set of eyes that will help you tailor your professional learning and the culture of the building. So I want to echo the positive as well. I think you're right to point that out.
Yeah,
Dr. Bolson.
So just to kind of, the special ed case is slightly different. So focusing, because one of the phenomena we've experienced, and this was kind of a market adjustment, is the majority of the new candidates coming out of higher ed now are duly certified. And that's a relatively new phenomenon. And because of the teacher shortage, and because we have, we offer the open contracts early, and, our students, most of those, according to my HR team, will choose general ed if they're offered that. And we have hundreds and hundreds of special education trained general educators in our classrooms, and they are fantastic teachers. So that's, I'm not going to run them off because they'll refuse to stay in a special education classroom. So, but the trouble is, every principal confronts that conversation every year. One more special educator comes to them and says, I need to move to a regular ed placement. And again, so if that school ends up with an additional non-certified, then the workload of those who remain who are certified. So there's a turnover thing, not just in leaving the district or even leaving the school. Many of them are staying in the school. And so we need both the incentives to stay in the special education classroom. It's something I've been sort of yapping about every time anyone asks me about what we should have done in the blueprint related to this. Because to me, that's one of the quickest, most impactful fixes we could make, to have the incentive be there rather than on the other things we've invested in. But again, so looking at the data, not so it's, do we really have a count? My team's getting better at collecting data. It's not easy, of how many special education certified people we have working in our districts who are not in special ed classrooms. It's just like the teacher shortage issue. We've seen data out of other states. They say, we have this many people certified to teach in this state who are not teaching. Why? The same thing as special education. We have this many people in our state certified to teach special education who are teaching in other places. How can we fix that and get them back into those classrooms where we desperately need them?
That's helpful to hear from the PK-12 arena, that even though in higher ed we're working to make folks dual certified, that some people are still opting out. So that's great. That's helpful for us. I also wanted to share that to your point about us not having the information, in the page 12, other voluntary resignation, and I think we talked about this before, 22% of those people are other. And so if qualitatively, we can figure out what those themes are in that existing other, we could begin to understand what it is we're looking for to get at the problem. And so that's just something for us to think about as well, to as a solution. And then finally, Dr. Bolson, in terms of the budget for districts and how they are being taxed, is, for example, your district still able to provide existing teachers any kind of tuition remission for, because some districts, their budgets are out. So I think that also varies by district, depending on what they have in their budget. Some budgets can afford them and some don't. And so knowing the districts too can like help us, because if they can get their tuition remission, then they can earn some of the other courses, which is where I was trying to start with Kelly, with stacking courses. So I'm trying to think about a solution for all of us.
You brought me almost to another observation for this.
Okay.
Sorry. I know I've talked a lot today. The Maryland Leads money did a lot to advance Grow Your Own. That was one of the goals of Maryland Leads, and we've invested a great deal in that. And I would argue, and I can't say this definitively, but I would argue that some of the uptick we've seen in educator output in the state is because of the partnerships that have developed, where now, you know, school districts are, I think, taking a much more active role in recruiting the students, and then, you know, they're still working with universities through these partnerships. But I would guess that that has somehow contributed to the fact that we're seeing a little uptick in teacher preparation. And so, but that money ended a couple weeks ago. And so I don't yet know. In Harford County, we are still paying a great deal for tuition reimbursement, and in my mind, if we could quadruple that, it would be fantastic. But I am worried that some places cut it last year. You'll see others cut it this year. And I'm worried about the medium and long-term effects on the turnaround we've begun to experience.
Dr. Woodward.
I come into this with the framework of like having chaired and supported a PAR program, an effective PAR program, the oldest in the state. And so I would dare to say that like I get calls from potential educators saying, I'm being told by my university, don't put the special education because you don't want to be in a space where your principal is like, sorry, I'm moving you to a special education position because that's where I need you. And educators don't want to be pigeonholed into that space. So it goes back to workload, expectations, and I think that, you know, now I think that's like out of our purview, but that is a significant thing that has to be dealt with and considered. I've brought up the exit data numerous times. There's just so much to unpack with that. The inequity of how LEAs are expected to actually achieve that information and then provide that information, I would dare to say there are 24 different ways in which that's done. So therefore it goes back to your point, Darren, we don't have an instrument or a mechanism. There was a couple of practices that happened before I got here that I know Baltimore County did. It was independent and they really got some great data when they were doing that, because I've been looking at their data that they had. But I think that is at the key to understanding. And I would dare to say that this is not even a true representation of that attrition rate that we see. Yeah. This might represent maybe 10% of the people who actually leave. So I think there's a disparity because folks are afraid to provide honest feedback. They don't want that used against them if I'm choosing to leave a county to go somewhere else. In their mind, it's not anonymous, the potential of that being spread, and they don't want that to follow. So I think there's just so much to unpack in that space that we would be remiss to try and do it today.
Well, it goes back to even the presentation.
Dion, I'm sorry, I've been trying to jump in for a little bit.
I'm so sorry. My apology. Please go.
Jump in for a little bit. But, this goes back to something that was said earlier. Dr. Shockley, you mentioned looking at like page 12. That's a large gap of people from involuntary leaving, and to the point of, I'm curious about what are the LEAs doing in terms of the teacher offboarding process. In terms of how are they getting this information? Is it just a survey? Are they actually talking to the teachers? Do they try to give them some general information about why this is important. It's not retaliatory or whatever, because it seems like there's just a disparity of other than just voluntarily leaving. So I'm just curious, and maybe someone can answer, what does the offboarding process look like when teachers are preparing to exit? Is it a survey that everyone completes? Is it a conversation that they have with someone in HR, with their principal, with a mentor teacher? Because I think that can really help fill the gap of this kind of large disparity. And maybe that would even be more helpful to what my colleague was saying, that they won't feel like they're going to be retaliated against, but it's something that's just a normal process.
Kelly, who could give us information about how the various counties conduct that research?
Each of the counties.
Well, I appreciate the honesty of that answer.
Unless do you agree?
I would think, yeah. I mean, I could give a very general answer because, I mean, with us, it's a conversation, but it's voluntary. And so we don't have 100% of the information because some people choose not to participate. But I would actually want to go back and check it because I'd be willing to bet if I asked my HR person, he'd give you a far more detailed answer than I'm able to.
Yeah.
I wonder, could like MLDS, I wonder if could be seen as a neutral party group, and I only said Maryland Longitudinal Data System, or some of the other units and centers that are not in the school district, if whatever instrument is designed, used, et cetera, they could help with that process so that it is anonymous, so that it, just like I wrote, right, so that it's anonymous, it's not given by X public schools, and the HR person could say, and as a part of your exit, can you please take this survey to help us, et cetera. Don't put your name, all the things that we know to do from a research perspective for the data collection, and partner with the MSDE to help us, all of us, get the information that we're seeking. So there are various units that would love to do this. They have research scientists who live and breathe this that we could tap into because it's their expertise that we could certainly, and then benefit from the expertise on this board and what we know and understand. And that could potentially happen through a work group. It could certainly happen through a center. I can think of 3 right now that could help us in partnering with the MSDE. So that's just a thought.
Dr. Wood.
And to Dr. Stockland's point, I think that would be consistent across the board, that it will be the same instrumentation, the same method of data collection. So we will have more validity of the data. And then we could even possibly have some postdoc fellows who can help support this and help extend that research of how it can be used. So I think that's a really good method of doing that.
Thank you. Dr. Woodward?
Through the chair to staff, Kelly, I guess my question was, you brought up a great idea around, now I'm not going to remember it, but around a way in which we could work through our lens to address some of the concerns around the special education, around conditionally certified. I guess my question is around the usage of, I guess, the induction, because I know that was some of the work, and I can't recall whether that was PSTEB work or that was Board of Ed work that was the induction program, and the PAR, that's a part of the blueprint that Dr. Bolson spoke to. And so I just wondered, in that space, to me, those seem like 2 explicit spaces in which we would be addressing and dealing with conditionally certificated educators. And I just wanted to stuff it out and figure it out.
Sure. So just so everyone is clear about, I guess, the purview of this board. So think preparation, think licensure. So for instance, you've got a combination when we're talking about the induction of conditionally licensed teachers, because they're going through preparation while they're also being inducted because they're teachers. They're already in the classroom. So while it's the purview of the state board to develop those regulations and if there's a delineation between what that induction period should look like for those 2 different types of teachers, that would go in the induction regulations. But it's very much the purview of this board to really be talking about what does that, like for ed prep, how does that need to change because those teachers need something different than your traditional candidate, bachelor's degree candidate? It's not always something that you want to regulate, but certainly conversations that we could be having and potentially guidance we could be issuing to our ed prep partners.
Right, and I think where that opens up is because in this new round of COMAR, and we talked about it in our presentation today, we are becoming more specific in the way we write COMAR to require certain skills and dispositions. And I see that coming up in the administrative work group as well. Now, if we don't truly understand what causes attrition and we write those skills and dispositions, there is a potential mismatch. So I realize we have a very limited purview, and I agree with you, and thank you for going over it. But in order for us to do even our limited purview, we need more information. And that's where I think this board has sort of a responsibility and an opportunity to request something be done, to design something to give us more information. So I realize we're not going to solve this today, obviously. And Ms. Moore, you had a comment or a question?
It's a slight, it's looking at a different slide a little bit. It's indirect to this topic a little bit. So
go ahead.
If that's okay? Okay. So I was just looking at slide number 7, and it's kind of direct because it's about recruitment or retention of teachers. But being someone who teaches in one county and lives in another, and I get to see both views, as a parent in one county and a teacher in another, I'm a social studies teacher, and I look at, in a social studies typically is a male-dominated non-person of color. So, and I'm the only person in my department of a person of color. And then I look at my daughter from kindergarten through 9th grade. She's a 9th grader now. She's not had one person of color as a teacher. Now, I kind of expected that, knowing where I moved to when I lived there. But the county itself, as I'm looking at this, has grown exponentially, like huge in Frederick County as far as the children that they teach, but the teachers are not showing that. And so, I'm sorry, Frederick County is where I live, but I teach in Montgomery County. And so, I had this conversation with my daughter because I was like, there's something to be said to have a teacher of color, in your life at least once. I mean, I know how we may be teaching the same subject, but offering those different perspectives. So my question, with all that comment in the beginning, is how does Maryland State Board of Education work with, what is their role with the locals in recruiting or even retaining? And I say retaining as well because I know there are people of color in our education system, and many of them stay 3 years and they're great teachers, and then they move not out of education, but they move up. And it's wonderful that they're in those places of, curricular writing or in our higher education and all those levels, but then they're leaving the classroom, and that's where we need to see them. And there's very few. And I would hate, again, for my daughter in our neighborhood alone, just where we live, it's very, very diverse. And her school is very, very diverse. So the population is diverse, but the teacher staff is not. So I'm just wondering, is it all on the shoulders of the locals to try and actively recruit and retain those teachers in the classroom, or does MSED provide some support in making sure that teachers are coming in that way? That's where I was going.
I'm sorry, Kelly, did you want to respond to the
Sure.
question?
Sure, and I will turn to my LEA and Board of Ed members to add on to this. So there's a few ways that the State Department could potentially assist and has assisted within the last several years. Now, as Dr. Bolson recently mentioned, we just hit a huge funding cliff with the ESSER funds, but that is one way that the state set aside a significant amount of money for our LEAs specifically to address retention. So funding is one way the department can assist. We actually have had a statewide marketing campaign for the past 5 or 6 years. It's not a large amount of money. It's a small pot of money, but it is something that from the state level we have done many initiatives, and I'm always happy to come back and give this board an update on that because we're proud of it. So there are different ways that the State Department can assist. I can't speak on behalf of the board. I think that every board probably has their own initiatives that they want to hit. And I know recruitment is very high on the list right now. We have a new board administration. And I know that it's very important to the governor. So the governor's team is working on it too. So I would say it's not all on the shoulders of the LEAs, but absolutely they're bearing the brunt of it because they are the employers of these teachers.
And I would even follow up to say that that's probably one and the same with the conversation that's been going on with the special ed, that when we think about exiting, teachers that are exiting, and just again, conversations with teachers that I know of people of color, that a lot of them aren't leaving education. They're not necessarily leaving their county or district. They're leaving the classroom. Yes. And that should be an important question on whatever exit development that we have is, why don't you stay in the classroom? I've been asked many times in my 18 years, oh, would you like to move on and take the cert? And nothing against wanting to be an administrator. But I like being in the classroom and I want to stay in the classroom until I retire. And I see so many of my other colleagues of people of color who are choosing to leave the classroom. And so we need to look at what we can do to keep them. Like, what is it that we can say to them to say, like, what gives you joy? Why do you want to stay here? Because they're not staying in the classroom.
Right. And I want to go on to Ms. Yoho and then Ms. Scordelis. I did want to mention something, if you'll indulge me for just a second. Looking at the data and so forth and what you brought up about minority teachers, teachers of color and so forth, looking at data like this was very much what informed this board in our purview to begin to think about in-district pathways, because when we really looked at the data and we worked with the previous superintendent, we discovered that the majority of teachers of color are not entering the classroom through traditional four-year programs. So how can we, if they're going in through a different route, then how can we help accommodate that? And that's sort of what led to that. So I say that only to say the data can help us in the realm that we have in our authority to create solutions, but we can't create it if we don't have this data. So that would be, and that goes exactly to your point. All right, Karen.
Well, when you said a really fast-growing county, Darren and I knew, I'm on the Frederick County School Board. And so I can tell you that, and I taught for 25 years before, I don't remember a time that increasing our diversity of teachers was not a goal of the system. And so the state can do lots of things, but ultimately those teachers decide amongst one of the 24 LEAs. And so that becomes the responsibility, the onus of that particular LEA to be attractive. And we keep trying. It is a goal. Part of it is exactly what Darren said, is how do we take the obstacles away so that more people of color, a more diverse workforce can even enter the profession. So we'll talk.
Sandra?
Also, when you were talking about what are we doing to address keeping them in the classroom, so the blueprint with the career ladder, I mean, it takes them out of the classroom to some extent, but like that's the purpose of the career ladder, is because it's now a Y between administration and teaching. So like you can move up the ladder, get more pay and everything equal to what an administrator does, and that's the goal of keeping teachers in the classroom, so that they're not leaving.
All right. I'm sorry, go ahead, Dr.
Just
Paulson.
add anecdotally, the blueprint, well, I don't entirely agree with it. MBC is the only approach to incentivizing people to stay. I can say it has made a difference. I mean, we've had people turn down specialist positions, coaching positions now because they're not eligible for the MBC stipend. And so we're beginning to see an impact. I'm also, because keeping people in the higher poverty schools has been, and we didn't see people moving to higher poverty schools with the incentives that were offered, but we've had many people in the high poverty schools begin their MBC pursuit, and so we think we will see some of the benefit that was designed there. And so while that's not specific to race, I think across the board, we are beginning to see some of that retention. So there is a strategy. It's just going to be a slower path.
Excellent point. And before I draw this to a close, did I miss any, and my apologies, did I miss anybody who's joining us online that wanted to contribute to the conversation? If so, just jump in now. As I get older, my vision of seeing little boxes gets more and more challenged. So My apologies for that. I think I'm going to have to start logging on so I see it on my little screen. All right. I think there's much more to be had in this discussion. I hate stopping it because I think there's more to be added as we go through. So my recommendation is when we set the agenda, we put this back on again and start to tackle this at various meetings and so forth. All right. So what I would like to do is entertain the approval of the minutes before we set the agenda.
So move.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. Could I have a second, and then we'll see if there's anything we need to change.
Second. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Correction. I was not at the September meeting.
Okay. So we have a second to approve and open now for discussion. And note that you were absent. Let's take a second to look at it and just see if there's anything else that needs to be changed. All right, it was fairly short. Are there any additions, deletions, or changes that need to be made? All right, all in favor of approving the minutes for September 12th, 2024, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
I think I'm wondering if there's another correction that needs to be made. I don't remember seeing Miss Stephanie Farmer here last time.
I don't remember seeing her either. She's a
We can
principal,
check.
right?
We'll check.
Okay.
Okay, so assuming that there's a check, the vote is adopted, so the September 12th, 2024 minutes are adopted pending that one check. All right, and then the next part we have is the November agenda. As I said, I would like to continue this supply and demand follow-up, so we'll make sure we put that on. Kelly, could you walk us through what you have?
Darren, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, Joy.
Didn't we need to approve the July minutes as well?
Were there July minutes? Did we get July minutes?
I don't think, I know I received them, but I thought that they were resent because they weren't approved at the last, I don't know why I have both sets.
This is where I miss Melita with her little book.
We approved them last month.
We approved, okay.
Okay, thank
All right.
you.
All right, good question.
I didn't have a check.
No, that's good to do. Thank you. All right, so Kelly, could you walk us through anything that you have for us for the next meeting you're thinking?
I would like to bring the incorporation by reference for permission to publish, the ones we discussed today, just the one. And then there's a presentation that we'd like to provide. We aren't providing it. We're asking it to be provided, and it potentially could be next month. The three southern Maryland counties, Charles, Calvert, and St. Mary's, have come together over the past year and have done some really nice work collaborating, specifically to identify strategies to recruit and retain educators. And they've recently published a document, and so I've asked if they would be willing to come and share their initiative with this board and what they're doing to potentially replicate across the state. So they said they are available November or December. It's up to us, but they are flexible.
All right, sounds to me like that dovetails nicely in the discussion we just had, because that matches perfectly. I would assume that the board would be interested in that, yes? Okay, so please do add that. Anything else? All right, well, I think that brings us to the end of our agenda. Have a wonderful fall and Halloween, and enjoy going into it. Any other comments before we close?
I just want to say that for anybody who has family in Florida, just extending warm wishes to you and your family, including my parents, who have been impacted by Hurricanes Helene and Milton. Thank you.
Excellent point. Anyone else for the good of the group? All right, seeing no objection, I will adjourn our meeting at 12:23. And I believe, Kelly, there's an orientation meeting after this, correct? Can you tell us about that?
We've moved it to November.
Okay, so that was moved to November. All right, thank you, everybody. Have safe travels.